Oh, no, I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I didn't know you were alive already. Jeez.
Yeah, I was getting bored, antsy, and slash trying to uh, build up the stream thing, but I was streaming and just chatting, so I didn't get a whole lot of people. And then I told everyone that it was going to be later, so they're rolling through
I
now.
see. I see.
It
Sounds
usually,
good.
yeah, it usually picks up once I've switched it back to the politics channel about like
All right.
15-30 minutes in.
Well, I appreciate you coming on here. I mean, that Josh guy just got a hold of me out of nowhere. It's like, hey, you want to debate? And I'm like, all right, I'll hop on in and give it my best shot.
Yeah, yeah, I
Hmm.
appreciate that. My chat wants you to introduce yourself, and I'll link your channel in there too.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am actually a YouTuber called The Incredible Aspie. I know it's a funny name. I get it. I get it. But it's actually based off of I am a channel that does multiple things. I pretty much just do whatever I want. I'll occasionally stream. You know, I stopped doing streams a lot because I find that streams sometimes can be, if you do them too much, can be a little bit soul draining. So I focus a lot on music. Uh, some political stuff, you know. I've in my past I've done some reaction videos. I might pick up on that again, but I'm pretty much just your average. I'm pretty much just your typical worthless YouTuber essentially. So yeah,
Yeah, they're saying base channel. Are you streaming this right now? Oh, actually, boring
I'm
the.
actually not. I don't know how to do it anymore.
Oh,
I haven't done it since before YouTube Classics, and I looked on there, and I'm like, oh, I am not going to be able to figure this out before I start streaming. So, yeah, I guess I don't really care. I mean,
yeah. Now you have to do like OBS and all that, right? It's like a
yeah,
little
you
bit
had to do
different.
OBS. I mean, I know one of my friends or acquaintances. Yeah, I consider him a friend. The dark conservatarian does what he does is when he does a debate, he'll get out OBS and he'll stream the debate to his channel. He'll go on somebody else's stream, but then he'll stream the stream to his channel. So
Yeah, yeah. So he just has the VOD. Yeah.
exactly.
It's a little bit weird for me because I do it on Twitch, so I just have to either record the VOD or download the VOD, and then I chop it up a little bit, like take out dead air and stuff, and then just upload it to YouTube. How I go about it, and then otherwise I mean I pretty much just stream, um, and take portions of my stream and make them into YouTube videos. So it's definitely a different content creation style than you, but both are very cool, and I appreciate people that make the prepared content, and I appreciate people that do streaming. Both are fun. So
Yeah,
in their
streaming
own ways.
streaming can take streaming can it takes a certain type of personality to do it. So I respect people who can make it work.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I have noticed ways in which my personality has shifted to better fit the whole vibe of it. But it's coming together. It's coming
Yeah,
together. I've been having fun.
I think before we get started on the topic which we're talking about today, systematic racism, I think we should give like a little overview of our sort of world beliefs or political beliefs because culture and politics are really close to one another.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely. I was gonna ask you if you wanted to go ahead and like go over your political background and ideological
sure.
framework.
Sure, of course. I mean, I am I have changed a little bit over the time, but I would consider myself I am what you would call a traditionalist conservative with some libertarian beliefs. Like there's just some things which I really just don't care about, you know. Well, I
Mhm.
wouldn't say I wouldn't care about, but there's just some things which I don't really see that are important to really get up and antsy about, like drug laws or what is it again? Gay marriage and stuff like
Yeah.
that. You know, I would have preferred like civil unions, but that's just my own opinion. When
Uh-huh.
it comes
So,
when it
what would you say sorry to cut you off a little bit, but, it seems like you're describing more of, like, a right libertarian than a traditional like a trad con. What would you say are, like, some of the traditionalism aspects of your ideology?
Well, I do believe that it is important to have a strong spiritual background. I don't hate I other than a lot of the people I know on YouTube. I don't really hate religion. I do believe that a lot that more good can come out of a church than bad, depending on how the church is run. You know, like if you have one of those like big giant what are called mega churches. I do have my own because a lot of times it feels like those churches are run more as a business
Yeah,
with a
like
sort of
the
CEO with a more of a CEO type model. Because when you have like I don't think they're all bad. I think some of them do a lot of good work, but
yeah, but
when
you
it
think
comes,
that some, like, have, like, a more marketing and personality focus than, like, a
yeah, true.
moralistic one?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of
Okay.
them, and a lot of them, I do believe that the better churches are the ones that are like that work on like a small level, like a local level, where there is also a kind of a system of checks and balances, a lot like the Presbyterian Church has or the Methodist Church. They have deacons and they have people who hold like who take care of different aspects of the church rather than rather than like a mega church, some mega churches where all decisions pretty much just come from the top down. So
Yeah.
I do think a sort of separation of powers is important within a church context in order to because even though we're Christians, we're human
Mhm.
beings. You
Yeah.
know, we're still prone to corruption and so forth. So
Yeah, I gotcha.
yeah, when it
Yeah.
comes to when it comes to I mean, I think that's pretty much it. You mind explaining your views?
Yeah, yeah, I just wanna add a little bit to, like, what you were saying, even though, like, I am not, particularly, like, a spiritualist, like, philosophy person, I definitely lean more into materialism. I can recognize, like, the benefits in, like, community building and stuff that, like, churches offer, and that, like, how, um it used to be really about, like, the community around, like, especially in, like, the smaller regards and how that was beneficial to people. Uh, but, in regards to my, like, political leanings, for people on the left, I usually get classified as, like, a social democrat, and then for people on the right, I typically get lumped in with like libertarian socialism or democratic socialism. I think that I believe like really strongly in positive liberties and that encouraging or like creating avenues so that people can actualize their freedoms produces better results for everyone because when you have a better actualized like ground floor, there is more potential to build off of that and create greater increasing quality of life and enjoyment for everyone
Mm.
involved in a
So you're
society.
so, so you're I would I may be completely wrong here, but you're because when I look at when people say democratic socialist countries, they're usually countries that are very capitalistic with very strong what we
Social democratic, yeah, 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 yeah. I get,
social safety nets.
yeah,
Yes, that's what I'm
yes,
trying to say.
yeah, yeah. Um,
I I haven't done a lot of research on that. The most I know more about more about Norwegian black metal than I do about the Norwegian like
like
political
system,
system.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So like the Nordic countries are social democratic countries. They sometimes get classified as socialist, but they haven't completely democratized the workplace. They haven't gotten rid of the commodity form. They haven't made a move really in the direction of like communism. And usually, like for something to be classified as socialist, it has to have already attained like a principle of communism. I don't know necessarily that any of those are necessary for the best outcomes in life. I do kind of lean strongly into that there are industries that could be decommodified because external market failures result in bad outcomes. and I also like am in favor of worker co-ops and things of that nature being an option for people to create their livelihood. But I don't know that either of those are like necessary on a like a broad across the scale basis.
I see. All right, I can imagine. I could see why you would believe why you. So from the sound of it, you sound like somebody who's not like an absolute hater of capitalism. I mean, even a lot of people on the left would acknowledge that capitalism has resulted in a lot of or what I would say market economies have resulted in a lot of innovation and improvement in the human condition over the years. I mean, of course there are
Yeah.
problems. Of course there are cracks in the sort of free market system, of course, but there's cracks in pretty much any system. You can't really just say it's all bad or all good. You got to choose between what I would call the less. I wouldn't say the lesser of two evils. You got to make trade offs.
Well,
Life is
yeah, yeah, but I like so if it was demonstrated to me that like socialism or communism resulted in better quality of life and like better outcomes, like I'd immediately drop like any tie to capitalism. I like the end results and the outcomes is like the most important thing to me. And there's definitely like better like it theoretically is possible that there are better ways to organize an economy because we've seen the progression from like chattel slavery society to feudalist to mercantile capitalism to laissez-faire capitalism to regulated capitalism.
to a sort of
um,
mixed economy. I see.
yeah, and a mixed economy. So, and I would 100% say that data seems to demonstrate that like a mixed economy to at least some degree results in better outcomes.
Yeah, but when it comes to the societal aspects of sort of communism, we I do think that communism, that sort of far left sort of communist, whenever try to implement it, whenever they're implemented, they always result in like totalitarianism, massacres, people, because I'm a political because dictatorships never work. So and when you study the sort of system of communism, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm mostly spouting off the top of my head because I know the system of how communism is supposed to be achieved. But
Yeah.
today, I would have to do more research on that topic. But I know that one of the steps you could say in sort of achieving a sort of ultra equal society is the implementation of a what we would call a very powerful government, which and they implement a command economy, and that eventually fizzles out into a sort of the what are we what would be called the Ubermensch, the sort of
Yeah, so there's things in regards to like Marxist Leninist like communist thought that really addresses that like Vanguard Party and things of that nature. I my communist like I don't hold like a super high like oh pie in the sky like theory is like the end all be all. It like that it doesn't really matter to me at the end of the day. Like data is like more important, and I recognize that there's a lot of ways uh that damn, I just totally lost the thought on that one.
I know we
Uh
should talk.
I think that like it's very difficult to like say that we are going to get into communism like in our lifespan. So I don't even like really consider that. I consider like things that are reasonably achievable and leave a better tomorrow for like the next generation.
I can understand. I would rather communism never take hold, but that's just me. All
Yeah.
right, maybe.
Well,
So
well, well, let me ask one more question about that because I just want to know. Say that communism did result in like a better, more egalitarian society, or I shouldn't use better, but because that's loading it. If it resulted in an egalitarian economy or society where the like me average level of quality of life was about where it is now or higher, would you be opposed to it?
Well, I technically, if I'm the reason why I oppose it is because I believe it's not better, but I haven't really done research on that. I think what we're supposed to be talking about isn't it systematic racism. Yeah. So what well essentially my the question you're asking me is hypothetically, if communism resulted in a better outcome for humanity and everybody else, would I support it? Well, that's sort of a high pie in the sky type question because I don't think it's truly resulted in better, but I would have to say, just for the heck of it, sure. But I don't think it would be, and that's why I don't support it. So why don't we start talk? You want to start talking about the topic we came to talk about today, systematic racism?
Yeah, yeah. If you want to lay out your position, you
All
can
right.
definitely do that.
All right, let me just open up the file right here and let me just go through my sort of position on systematic racism. Lord help me. All right, here we go. My hello everyone. Today we are debating the topic of systematic racism, and I take the position that systematic racism doesn't exist. And the reason why I don't believe systematic racism exists is because systematic racism is a what I would call a highly amorphous term. In fact, in that it has, depending on who's defining it, has multiple definitions. One person would say that when people hear the word systematic racism, that most people would think back to the Jim Crow, slavery, all the and like redlining and all the outwardly discriminatory policies that were put in place in order to sort of hold the black community down. But when people talk about systematic racism nowadays, it seems to be one of it seems to be at least implied one of two definitions. One, that in the shadow of Jim Crow and all these policies, that there were some what I would call policies which in their language are neutral, but tend to would say 10 but are were put in place to maintain a sort of ascribed second class status for the black community. And I believe what is the more proper definition, which a lot of people on the left give, is that it is a system of disadvantages and social attitudes that 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 all coalesce to sort of keep the black community down in society and sort of prevent them from achieving what we equality or equity when it comes to social performance. I don't really agree with this because with this term mostly because I believe that the term systematic racism is an oversimplification of a really complicated topic, because the topic of black of the sort of African American sort of performance in society is a very complicated topic that has so many different variables that you cannot just reduce it down to racial discrimination. Of course, racial discrimination has happened in the past, and on some minor fronts still happens today, but I don't think it exists to a point to where it is keeping the black community down en masse. You know, it seems to that all, as I said, most disadvantages and disparities are, I believe, most what we'd call disadvantages and disparities are due to what I would call differences in class, culture, and just circumstance. Like race, while performance is often correlated with race, I don't think it is caused by race.
Yeah.
For ex- for example, I would take into account the wealth disparity. That even though income for minorities and the average income for black people and white people has gone up over the years, and while it still trails behind white people relatively largely, that the reason for that such a bit that the wealth disparity still remains pretty much pretty similar to what it was before and is still growing. In fact, it hasn't changed much for the amount of the medium wealth that black people have don't hasn't really changed much over the years. And
Yeah.
I saw a study which said that, income differences and differences in inheritance really sort of explain only like a marginal percentage of that. And income
Uh-huh.
differences can be big. And the study actually meant to actually went into why the other like three quarters of the wealth disparity in the study, it says, is largely undefined, and that the big reason for, and that one of the main reasons why, I mean, there's other factors which they haven't, but the main factor is because when it comes to saving and investing, black people tend really not to like risk. What I mean
Uh-huh.
by that is that when they invest their money,
Yeah.
they don't really invest it into like high risk stocks, like they're not investing in the Chevron
Yeah.
or Tesla. Is Tesla still public? No, they're private now.
Yeah. Well,
But
why do you think that African Americans don't take high risk investments?
well, it's largely cultural. They're not really big on
Yeah,
risk, and
where
that
where
can
does
be due to
that
their
where does that
past.
cultural element come from?
It could come from their past. It could come from their past experience. They're just because of all the because of stuff. Because while I don't think black people en masse are being affected by by racial discrimination, I do think that the sort of that had that the culture that what their grandfathers and stuff suffered in the past has largely caused them to sort of develop a culture which is not really which doesn't really like risk. And that in this and it's complete while it's completely understandable, it still is a big reason why the black community is not is not really it I'm real
You're
I'm really
totally
nervous.
okay. You're totally okay. It's
I'm just kind of
it's chill.
nervous right now.
Yeah, it's chill, dude. I'm just listening to you. So
Can I
if you
I
want to
would
continue, you can.
I'll finish up a little bit.
Okay.
I'll finish this up real fast. And the last thing I'll say, well, one of the last things I'll say is that statistical disparities, oftentimes when you see statistical disparities between races posed online, a lot of them say they just pose out that a disparity does exist, but they
Hmm.
never give a reason like why. And it seems like
Yeah.
a lot of times they just assume that it's racial discrimination. And and that I don't think this is a good way of thinking, because I do think that it not only is a really bad way of looking at the world, it also breeds a really bad mentality in the black community that that they have no agency over their livelihoods, when in fact they do. Many black people have become not only just rappers and athletes, which is stereotypically what black people become, but there's also a lot of rich entrepreneurs, people who own stock companies and other corporations who become really rich. And now over time, it'll I do believe that it'll improve. But I do believe that time is the biggest solution, that most of the cultural problems such as single motherhood, the sort of scope problems such as black students not being really typically, like the problems in schooling, the problems in a lot of the cultural problems and problems that exist in the black community, well, time is the biggest solution. And it also needs to come from the top. A lot of like the black leaders, such as the civil rights leaders, their pastors, the
Yeah.
black politicians too, breed this sort of mentality of you everything in your life is because of this sort of invisible invisible force, or these sort of disparities which are or because of racial discrimination, is and that you have no agency over your life, which I believe that they do. I Of course, some improvements could be made in society, such as we fix the school systems,
Yeah.
that would be a big help,
Yeah.
form changing the sort of social safety net to not incentivize single motherhood, and but
Okay.
most of it will come through time. That's my position. Now, thank you for listening to me. And
Oh yeah, dude, of course.
does the chat hate me yet?
No, one person. Well, we'll get to that question because it'll derail us pretty hard.
Please
Okay.
don't be no, please don't be angry. I'm
No, no,
just
no, no, they're not angry. They're all chilling. They're having a good time. Everyone. Some people are saying they disagree with everything, but they appreciate you. Like it's totally chill. I pretty often uh am very chill in debates. I don't go super blood sports
Me
usually.
too. Me too. I'm not a
Which
Bloodstone's
I
type
don't I don't
person.
know how that's gonna work for me, but we'll try.
Right.
Uh Anyways, so I would say that it does seem like you demonstrated that you agree that there are systems, socioeconomic, in place that do have disproportionate outcomes and impacts on people, minorities, primarily African Americans living in dense inner city urban areas. You may just disagree about the severity of it. However, what I would say is that the cascading effects of earlier subjugation that they experienced, going from slavery to Jim Crow to redlining, segregated them into these areas of high urban density, where then further policies have created very bad impacts for them, which in turn creates a culture based around adapting to those sort of circumstances. So, like, one of the great examples of it is that public education is funded by property tax. When you have a whole community living in these lower valued housing, you have an underfunded school, and then the school's density is a lot higher because there's more people living within a particular region. And then, so you have people graduating or not graduating and having lower uh, educational levels, which typically results in lower income, which is a great predictor for the preponderance to commit crime, which then translates into the justice system where we see discrepancies occurring. And then it just adds on, and you have this handing down over and over again through the generations. Because when we recognized that slavery, Jim Crow, and redlining were wrong, it was kind of like two people were in a marathon, and at the beginning of the marathon, the other person had put a ball and chain on the other one's leg, and someone came up and said, "Oh no, this is wrong," but then doesn't take the ball and chain off and doesn't address those that bad start. And I would say that focusing on the complex issues will result in better livelihood for these communities and for communities throughout America that may be kind of like invisible communities, and that we don't recognize them also experiencing bad outcomes from all of these uh, waterfalling downstream effects. And that overall it leads to happier and happier people.
Hmm. All right. So one of the big reasons why brought up you brought up, of course, redlining and these things which you say pretty much segregated black people into their own into their own communities, and that the effects of that translate to today in that s- school systems are very poorly funded, and so on and so forth. But I disagree with the idea, one, that that sort of that red that past effects that past policies are an example of a modern day what we'd call systematic racism, because those were policies that were once, redlining was banned in the 1960s, and of
Yes,
course
but so
and of course
that's why I said the cascading effects then play into our criminal justice system and how our educational system works, and that those are the examples of the modern systematic racism.
mm,
Because regardless of if it's an explicit or even an implicit bias, it does have a disproportionate impact on these racial groups, and we can examine it through
all
that
right.
lens and address that, even if it also tracks with class basis because we see there's a lot of correlation with low class and things that are considered black culture in America.
Well, here's the interesting thing about that. I don't think it's just redlining why the black community is in the state that it is. I mean, of course, I do think redlining at one point in history is a did play a role in where the black community is. I One of the reason why the black community has not really developed a culture which is very conductive to success, I believe in large part is due to after the end of segregation, there was a lot of black people who actually did have money left the black communities. And that after that happened, a lot of black people, these were the people who actually hired black people, gave them good jobs, and not just like factories like Ford and so forth. You also
Yeah.
had like rich black people who were basically the investor class. You need an investor class in a community, and
Yeah.
these people were and these rich black people had businesses. They were well off, and they would oftentimes hire they would oftentimes only hire other black people because that's all they could hire in those communities. And they would
Yeah. But that's
and they
because
would
of the racial demographics of those communities.
true, but the thing is that it started to lead to a sort of a sort of normalization of what I would call a middle class norms, and they started to develop a culture which is relatively similar to the modern day white culture. I mean, there's still major differences, but it started to but then after when segregation ended, and this is not an argument for segregation at all, it led to a lot of the rich black people left. There wasn't just white flight, there was black flight, and this led to their investor class and their sort of employment class leaving. And this left and this stunt and this in a way stunted the black community's growth. And
Yeah.
another thing is that in a school, I mean, funding does play a big role, but I do think the reason why schools in the black community are so poor is not just because of their funding, but it's also because you know black kids in the so are not a lot of times they have single mothers, and they're not well disciplined by their
Well, but
parents,
I would say that they
and
have
also
single mothers in part as a result of both that those communities have lower education, which results in higher preponderance to crime, which means that a father's more likely to be removed. Also, poor access to contraception. In some areas, there's a lot of push and negative media entanglement towards the black community in regards to Planned Parenthood, and that and then so then you have single mothers in these inner city areas, and then those kids will then grow up to perpetuate that cycle because the fundamental issues of like that education hadn't been addressed originally.
Man, but here this thing is I went to a school which was relatively, on the poorer side of town, and I would oftentimes see a lot of these kids, just walking through the halls, not really caring about their. Of course, you have like stories like Ben Carson, who was raised by a single mother who did very well in his life, and I do
Yeah,
think
but that's
it is.
anecdotal. Like, I
I
mean,
know that's an anecdotal, but the thing is that it shows that that black students are not they don't they don't really taught to care about their education. There's nobody there to sort of push them. And yes, I do believe that if parents are not cannot take as good care of their students, that they're that the school should be the next line of defense, should be the next line of defense.
Yeah, because
But
education's like the great equalizer. Like that
of course,
like across the board, like worldwide has been proven like time and time again that better education results in like better outcomes for the population.
of course. But the what I also want to say is that also it's not just that you also have it's not just poor funding. It's also very poor teachers too. The thing is that when you
Well,
have
yeah,
the
because
how the
you're
way
not
school
sorry. You
how
go
way
ahead.
that school the way that teachers unions are some of the most corrupt in the country. And the when a teacher's like really bad, they're not in. It takes it's very difficult to remove poor teacher
Okay, wait.
from
No,
a
I disagree with this premise entirely. So I would say that you have worse teachers in those areas because, um, though a lot of people aren't going to drive like into the inner city to teach, and then people that are uh in that area are going to have a lot less commitment to it because a lot of those people are going to come from out of the area, so they don't see it as like part of their community, and they are viewing it also through um the lens of it being like a separate thing.
Well, here's the thing. I think we're gay. Well, the thing about the school debate is even though these disparities exist, still the graduation rate for high school graduation rate for Black students is almost up to par with white students, according to the Pew Research. According to Pew Research data, so even though they are suffering a lot, even
Almost
though there are huge differences
almost up to par. Like what's the statistical difference there?
by like three, like 4 percentage
Okay,
points. It's
okay,
it's very
yeah.
it's very small, and the and another thing is that when Black students do go to college, that when they go to college, they don't usually choose what we well high. They don't choose high income majors. I do believe that Black student they only make up like eight out of when he looks at what type of majors Black students go into. They usually go into lower income like sociology. They like 8%, like 8%, like Black students make up like 8% of the of engineering majors, 7% of like mathematics, and 5% of computer science majors, because as I said before, there is a propensity in the Black community to avoid risk. And I guess a lot of Black students, when they get to college, they feel it is very risky to go into a major that is that competitive, so they choose something lower, which even though it's going to end up in a lower amount of income, they're still going to there's I guess they just don't really feel like going into something which is, I mean, other factors could work into it, of course, but
Yeah, because I mean, so I would say that there's a whole lot of factors that go into
sure, of course.
the selection of majors, and I would almost argue that like if we were going to base it on like an aversion to risk, going into higher income um majors would be less risky than potentially going for an education that's going to provide you a job that has like a lower income, because part of like those lower income things is because there's not a high amount of demand for people in those positions. Like I mean that ties into supply and demand for sure,
Of
what
course, of course.
different positions are awarded, um because obviously there's like huge numbers of STEM related uh and medical, like nursing and things like that. Like there's a high demand for people of those majors. Like we see that play out really heavily based on our like service based economy. Um, I just so you keep like coming back to this cultural thing, and I guess I want to know where do you think this culture is derived from? Because if you think that it's derived from socioeconomic and not like a genetic thing, then I would say that
Of
like
course not. I'm not a
okay,
race real.
okay, okay. But then I'd say that if you're like acknowledging that it comes from a socioeconomic impact, then the fact that their socioeconomic situation has been uh shaped to some degree by both past policies and the way in which it wasn't adjusted going into the future to really address like how inner city like societies need to be uplifted and developed, that it is like it itself fits into part of the overall like systemic racism, because I would say that like just as much that attitude is an aspect of it.
I see what you're trying to say, but I disagree that that's a part of systematic racism, because systematic racism is a system that is meant to keep the Black community from achieving social equality or equity. And I don't think there are any like policies that really do that. And I would say that past treatment, that's sort of late throwing past treatment or past policies into into modern, into sort of that sort of umbrella term of systematic racism, I don't think is really fair. I mean,
Well,
it's sort of
because these modern policies work for suburban areas and more dispersed living areas, but don't really account super well for low income urban areas, and it the correlation between the ethnic groupings and demographics that make up those regions in tandem with the fact that these policies that we have in place for certain things like education, policing, uh, seem to have disproportionately bad impacts in areas like this and do not function as well, seems like we need to look and readdress the way in which we approach communities like that.
so what you're saying. So I'm having trouble understanding what you're trying to say. What you're saying is that we should directly address, is that we should directly address the how past treatment of the black community has how has affected their sort of societal performance. Now, I don't really I don't agree with the implementation of reparations, because I don't believe reparations would, fix the many problems that exist in the black
Well,
community,
yeah,
such as,
I'm not
single
saying
motherhood.
reparations. I'm saying things like the way in which we engage in broken window policing, the way in which we engage with how public schools are funded, how we engage with the building quality of inner city tenement homes, the food deserts, things like that. I don't think that we need to go out and give payments to these communities. I just think that the way in which policies are addressing these issues clearly isn't working. We're seeing overwhelmingly bad outcomes in these areas. And sure, there are examples of the individuals that get out and succeed, but it is at such a lower rate than the average white individual in the US that there seems to be a problem there.
Well, I think it has to do with, differences. As I said, it has to do with differences, and I know a lot of people on the left sort of moan at this, but I do think a lot of it has that I do understand that has to do with, personal choices. Now, I understand that there's a lot that goes into the choices that people make in life, but if you look
Yeah.
at the statistically, like the Brookings Institute, which is, I'm sure you've heard this statistic before, that if people want to, do well in life, that they have to do one of three things: graduate high school, don't be unmarried and have a child before like the age 25, and don't
Yeah.
get a full-time job, and you will be relatively well off in life. I personally, the whether or not a black person can be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, I do think largely is largely irrelevant to this conversation,
Yeah,
because
no, I'm not going there at all.
I do think black people can be the leaders of Fortune 500 companies, and I do think there are a couple who actually have been. But I think my standard is whether or not a black person can live the typical middle class life. Can, buy
Yeah.
buy a decent house and a decent neighborhood, go to a decent school, and live a relatively comfortable life. And I do think that black people can do that. But I do think while there are some problems that, let me say it like this: there are a lot of while there are some problems which can be that are outside of the black community's control, I do think that there are a lot of cultural problems within the black community that need to be addressed. And
Yeah.
there's no real policy change that you can really do that. You can do it to incentivize it. You can
Yeah.
just
But
you can do to
that's so
incentivize it.
but that's what I'm saying, and because you kind of agreed that culture, it does stem, from a socioeconomic thing. I'm saying that um the way that these policies have interacted with these communities have led to the culture developing around like how to survive within these communities. And that in addressing things like the war on drugs, education, helping like de density inner cities and things of that nature like will result in culture like shifting. I mean, we see culture in the modern era shift like uh very rapidly, and I would almost contest like that white and black culture is like that different that it's would result in like that significant of discrepancy in outcomes, because I mean we clearly enjoy the same things. What suburban whites are the highest consumers of like rap music, and the actors in the movies like Black Panther was the greatest selling Marvel movie at the time and things of that nature. Like we relate, obviously. So like the idea that there's like these really like deep seated ideological cultural differences, I just it seems a little strange unless like you could point to a reasonable reason that those like discrepancies exist.
Why, I mean, of course, I mean, I'm not going to say the reason why these cultural differences do exist, such as the sort of tendency towards risk aversion. Really, I will agree with you that it is largely due to to sort of past experience of the black community. But I just don't believe that is an example of systematic racism, because if there are black people who are doing well in life, I do think and the fact that this is able to happen and that they're able to live a sort of middle class lifestyle, which is comparable to the sort of what which is sort of comparable to how a white family
Yeah,
would
but if the
live. It
vast
kind of
major if the vast majority aren't, it seems like those people are probably having to put in a great deal of effort. And I mean there's studies that show that blacks on all like socioeconomic levels of class are less likely to earn the same or out earn their parents, and are more likely to fall into lower like economic classes. And like it would be strange that this culture pervades all economic levels, and that it
true.
doesn't have more to do with the way that these communities, because it could just as easily, and we see it with inner city whites, it just as easily occurs. That's why we see the discrepancy like in marijuana arrest, is because more whites like as a whole population live in suburbs and lower policed areas, but yet we see
Well,
blacks
I want
erased.
to talk. Yeah, sorry. Keep going. Finish up. Sorry.
So whites and blacks consume marijuana at about the same rate, but blacks are 4 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession.
Well,
Um,
let me explain why that is. Why there seems to be more. Why the black people tend to get arrested for like. I'm sure you're familiar with the crack cocaine discrepancy. Why
yes.
crack cocaine gets harder punishments than black than powder coke.
Yeah, but there's no
I think.
pharmacological reasons for that.
Well, the reason why is because, I this is my way of rationalizing it, is that back in like the 70s and 80s,
Yes.
you had a huge spike in crime, which was largely funded. Have you ever seen the documentary Crips and Bloods Made in America?
No.
It was this documentary which talked about the sort of upcoming of the Crips and Blood gang in north and southern Los Angeles, and how they came to be. And one of the big things that happened was the introduction of crack cocaine
Yeah.
caused a lot of these gangs who were fighting against each other in large proportions to take up uh, got to take up on to them. They had more money now, so they could buy they could go from single shotguns to fully automatic guns. They were pulling triggers in like
Yeah,
20
but we see
flying
that
out.
with any time that there's like a demand for God, what is the word? Like an illicit good, because like when alcohol
But it
was
was uniquely bad in the black community,
no,
and
that's not true, because when alcohol was prohibited, like that was an incredibly violent time.
I know it was an incredibly violent time, but in the black community, there that was but we're not talking about
Yeah,
prohibition. We're
well,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah,
the
yeah, but I
20.
mean, that's comparing 2 different times, but that's
Yeah,
what I'm
that
saying
is.
is that it doesn't seem to be like it's groups of oppressed people or people who have no other economic recourse are meeting the demand for a good because everyone consumes it. Like, we
I was
statistically all consume it at the same rates.
I was bringing that up because the reason why they punished it more was because the crack cocaine epidemic was crack cocaine, the amount of crack that the crack was connected to a lot of like really bad stuff. You know, you had like at one point in history you had like a person dying a night in
Mhm.
Compton, and it was just horrible, and the police didn't know what to do about it, but
Yeah.
sadly, because it was in a completely different part of Hollywood, nobody in Hollywood really cared. So they would
Yeah.
just go about it. But
Well, and
when
because
it
they also were consuming the crack cocaine.
may probably
I
too,
mean,
but
like, polls over and over
I
again
mean
show that
yeah, white
everyone
people do.
consumes drugs at the same rate for
Yeah,
all
they
drugs.
do. I know white people consume a lot of crack cocaine at higher rates than black people. But the thing is that when white people do drugs, they take their drugs and they go home.
Yeah,
Black
well, that's
when
because they're more likely to
you go to like
possess,
poor
like, a
communities, you
private
have people.
abode.
You have a lot of gunfights and you have a lot of conflict, which leads to a lot of innocent people dying. So the city's only recourse in sort of taming that was putting in place policies which put heavy penalties on crack cocaine use. And there it was
Yeah.
there. I mean, was it good policy? Probably not.
Yeah, no, because I mean, we still see people consume crack cocaine at the same rate, like, and the drop in crime rate, like, from the '80s into the '90s, like, it's so, like, across the board nationwide that it's very hard to point to any, like, specific thing in regards to it, and drug consumption has remained relatively the same, if not higher nowadays.
I am a believer in the decriminalization of drugs. I would
Oh, okay,
prefer
cool,
a
we're on
sort
the
of.
same page.
Well, but what I disagree with is that that had any sort of heavily racial component. The only racial component which I would agree with is that it ended up. I that is that it ended up, having a huge effect on the black community. But my disagreement is that that was the intention. I mean, there was
Well,
no.
I don't
They
know,
were trying.
it seems super strange that the cheaper one, which happens to be moved by the Black community, is the one that is 100 times more strictly enforced.
Because people weren't killing each other en masse over
Those
cocaine.
dealers were moving the same drug though, like, at the end of the day. Because, I
Yeah,
mean,
but it was but
the cartel move like, South American cartels move cocaine in, and then it gets uh, reduced down into crack. And a lot of these distributors like to
well,
move these
they did it
large
inside the
millions and
crack
millions.
houses themselves. They did it inside. It's
Or
very
yeah, okay,
apparently
but I mean,
it was.
then that would still mean that I mean they were at one point possessing cocaine. Like, there is no real reasonable reason that both of these drugs would not have the same
What the reason? Well,
level.
let me summarize it like this: the reason why I believe crack cocaine was treated so with exceptional with a differing treatment was because it essentially funded a bloodbath.
Yeah,
You
but so
had
did the
people.
cocaine. Like, I mean, you had to have the
I
cocaine to
mean, yeah, in
do it.
Colombia, of course. I mean,
No,
The
but I mean, the
Colombo,
cocaine had to be here. They moved the powder
of course. But
but
I'm talking about
so it's
domestic. It
yeah,
funded a
yeah.
lot of. I'm not talking about international violence in Colombia. I'm saying it
No,
funded.
I'm saying the cocaine was moved here originally, and then it was, freed of its base into crack, like, the 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 base and the supply of
I
it,
mean,
the
I agree with you on that, but
yeah,
I
so it
don't.
seems really strange that the derivative was what was more harshly punished when if you just had grabbed the cocaine at the higher rate originally, you would see less crack, especially
Okay.
considering
I
cocaine's
do
more
I
expensive.
I do believe that you should go for the source, but again, the reasoning why crack cocaine was punished so heavily was again it was funding a lot of really bad stuff that was happening domestically
Yes,
inside the
because but
black
that
community.
cocaine had to be here for that crack to be here. That is what I'm saying. Like, the cocaine was the original source funding of it. Do you see what I'm saying? And it seems really strange that they picked a derivative that is more present in black communities because it is cheaper.
Because there was a lot because it funded a lot of violent because crack cocaine was funding a lot of very violent activities.
The
I
ar-
understand. I understand that you're saying that it would feel strange that the government is going after a substance which is not it which is a derivative of coke. Listen, I don't believe that crack cocaine that drugs should be that I do believe drugs should be decriminalized. I'm just explaining the reasoning why. I'm not saying they're saying that they. It seems that the difference is you think that crack cocaine was punished more heavily because it was specifically in the black community. I'm arguing that crack cocaine was punished more heavily enforced and that the penalties were higher because crack cocaine was connected domestically.
Yes, but the
Domestically.
cocaine is also connected domestically. The cocaine is originally the product that they had that they then made into the freebase within America. Like the cocaine was also there. That is why
Yes,
it is strange.
I do believe that that if you are going to
Because the drug runners are gonna have both.
the Portugal way of doing drug laws is they decriminalize drugs, but they banned transferring or what's the word for it again? Crap, I have a really bad memory when it comes to this.
I don't know what
Transferring
you're,
drug
exporting and importing?
exporting and importing. It's called drug. It's where you sneak drugs into a country. It's a specific law.
Oh,
It's a
drug mules?
drug mules. It's no, a drug mule is the
Trafficking,
person.
trafficking.
Trafficking, yes. Drug. They went after drug trap. Portugal went after drug trafficking, but they decriminalized all drugs. And they have seen, while they have seen a spike in marijuana usage, they have seen a slow reduction in other drugs such as heroin and so on and so forth. I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind that, but of course there are like certain policies where you can, if you're doing certain drugs, you can lose certain licenses and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So essentially, they don't throw you in jail for it, but they make you a but they make you more likely to but they make you but it's to incentivize people to get off drugs. They
yeah,
won't throw you in jail, but it'll incentivize you to stop doing drugs. And I think that is a on average a better policy than just a flat out just complete utter just take any drug you want because we already legalized cigarettes and alcohol and we've seen the societal effects that's had on people. So yeah,
yeah. I mean,
so I don't
I
want to
would
ban alcohol either. I mean,
yeah.
if
I would
I don't
argue that, like, it may be possible that legalizing it and highly regulating those markets, so that, like, the primary source of it within America is, like, through these conglomerates, we may see better outcomes, but I'm in favor of either of those because I think decriminalizing drugs results in a
I'm
lot of better outcomes throughout,
I'm
like,
so
in
happy
regards
I can't
to
look at the chat right now.
you're okay. They're not freaking out.
Th- th-
Yeah, like,
th-
less gun crime, less all sorts of things because a lot of this is tied into, like, demand and supplying of drugs.
yeah. Is that also is that also I think we should get to the one aspect of this debate which I think is by far probably one of the biggest I would argue is the biggest aspect of the whole systematic racism debate is the criminal justice system,
Yeah,
police problems, and we could get into what I would call the racial disputed cases, but I think one of the first things to tackle is the reasons why the black community is sent to prison for longer sentences for different what I would call drug crimes. Well, no, well, wait, are sent for the same drug crime. Yeah,
yeah,
the reason why I read a study on this, and the reason why is because on average, black people tend to be obviously they're poor on average, and when you're poor, you can't afford good representation, and when you can't afford good representation, there there is a lot of you're bound to get sentenced to a longer time in prison.
yeah. They're
So
also
it's
more
so
likely to be overcharged and offered a plea deal, which also makes them more likely to go to prison.
I haven't seen that statistic.
I should actually have a study on the plea deal thing. Um, Give me a second,
That
but
would
you keep going. You can keep
that
going.
probably that probably would be connected to the representation
Yeah, yeah, it would be.
because they can't have them because most of these state prosecutors have like hundreds of cases which they've got to go through. So they are wanting so in a lot of the kids they just take a plea deal. I think another thing I read in the study was that black people were more likely to. I don't think this was a huge part of it, but they were more likely to take a um uh, a case to trial is that they're a lot less likely to take a plea deal and we're more likely to take a case to trial and this had
Wait, this is
some
the wrong
kind of
link. Why is it the link to your channel? I have it. Give me a second. Um, so this study uh assesses the effect of for race and finds that blacks are less likely to receive a reduced charge compared with whites. Studies have generally found a relationship between race and whether or not a defendant receives a reduced charge. The majority of research on race and sentencing outcomes shows that blacks are less likely than whites to receive reduced pleas, and in short, strongly indicates a racial bias in regards to bargaining and plea deals. But I'll send it over to you so you can
I
read
agree.
through it.
I mean this hard stats. I agree. I mean the hard stats are true, but I disagree with their conclusion that it has that the main reason why this happens is due mainly to racial bias because I read another study which said that they found really no proof of racial discrimination.
Oh well,
That is,
okay. I have another study that shows that first time felons in Georgia found black men receive sentences on average 207 days longer than similarly situated white males. But then when they differentiated by skin tone, it was found that light skinned black men saw virtually no disparity in their sentencing, while dark skinned black men saw a disparity of around 400 days.
that's an
And I can
interesting.
send that one too.
You can send you DM that one to me because I might want to look at that one.
Yeah.
The point is that the this is that a lot of this has the doesn't isn't like connected heavily to Sci-Hub. You use Sci-Hub?
What's wrong with
Cool.
Saya?
No,
Saya's
no.
just got. Sometimes easier to find it because sometimes Google searches thing is Scholar is not the greatest. I use JSTOR and Sci-Hub a lot, but I also Google Scholar stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, Sci-Hub. I I'm not gonna lie, I like Sci-Hub as well.
Oh, okay.
It's very
I know some people on the right are like weird about Sci-Hub for different reasons, so I wasn't sure if you were about to be like, "What the fuck? Why are you using Sci-Hub?"
I know, I'm joking. But the idea is that the point is that most of the that almost all of these statistics are not connect are not directly are not caused by are not caused by racial bias, but are instead they may be correlated, but they're
Yeah.
not directly
Yeah,
caused.
I think but I think that correlation plays into the way that, these cultures develop, and we kind of agreed on this a couple of times now, that the culture is to some degree impacted both by past legislation and by ongoing legislation in regards to how, like, inner cities themselves function, and that then creates the stereotype of low class because that is the culture associated with these bad outcomes, and then it all just feeds back into itself. And I don't know necessarily that it like has anything to do over like on an overwhelming scale sorry with like a disgust or like uh what is the word um
I just as
disaversion to African Americans, but I think that these things keep playing into each other, and then that is what forms like the system of bad outcomes, which I would describe as systematic racism because it has disproportionately harsher impacts on African Americans and to a lesser extent Hispanics.
the disparity. Well, I would say that the disparity is more connected to class than. Oh, let me say it like this: I don't agree. I still disagree with you with the idea that past treatment is a or the reactions to past treatment are an example of systematic racism, but. I think we should try to move forward. I think we should try to move forward.
Well, but
Mm,
I'm not saying that those are examples of current day. I'm saying that those primed these current policies to have a disproportionate impact on those communities. Because those
mm.
communities have then been segmented off, and, like, you I don't wanna meme on you a little bit, but it kind of implies, like, that you're saying, like, either to just move or just invest into these communities, but these communities are, like, you that doesn't solve it for everyone or even the vast majority, because then you have other communities disperse in response to it, and you're like, abandoning the people that cannot leave those inner city communities to the same impacts.
I mean, these disparities. I'd also like to bring up that one of these disparities in the criminal justice system really, really only affect like a a small portion of the black community, such as
Well, 1 in
the
3 black males can expect to be arrested.
for him because they're around a culture which is because I read another study which showed that the reason why black people end up in jail more often is because when they're young they're around a lot of delinquency when they're younger, and they're a lot around a culture which is
Yeah, but I
really
don't think that people
over.
should be going to jail for, like, truancy and stuff like that. I think that that even further plays into it, because then when you look at the, discrepancies in sentencing and the harsher punishments, then you're resulting in harsher punishments for these children, and then they end up going into juvie and stuff and resulting in worse education, which then plays into later in life, than being more likely to, uh, return to the criminal justice system.
Hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense to
The
you? Do you sort of see what I'm saying?
It's it's sort of it's kinda. I mean, I
What
mean,
would you
no, I
contest
don't want to
about it?
offend. What?
What would you
What?
contest about it?
I would contest that the main reason why the black community is why criminality again, it's very very complicated why why there are problems of criminality in the black community, and one of them is there is a real I don't want to sound like a boomer and start going like, oh, hip hop culture causes violence,
Yeah,
but
because, I
no,
mean,
but
whites consume more hip hop,
well,
so
true, of course. I mean, even Steven Crowder's a big fan of hip hop. But the
yeah.
thing is that according to many, black activists themselves, people who explain, the black community, that it sort of primes
Yeah,
is that
I
you have to be like is that then you listen that in the black community you can't just listen to it, you have to be that,
yeah, so
that
I
it is.
just because a black individual said that, like, that doesn't really track with any of the data.
I
I
know,
could care less
I
what that
understand. I'm just
what,
saying that
they're saying
I'm
in
just
regards to that, because a lot of these people are also, like, Nation of Islam people and stuff like that, and I disagree with them for a variety of other reasons.
I mean, of course. Oh yeah, the people who hate the Jews. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and, like, I don't know, that's still to the like, that literally contradicts, like, what we know about consumption rates and stuff in regards to that media, like, they're just talking out their ass on that one a little bit, like, just because you're in a community and you are speaking to your anecdotes, like, that doesn't mean that that's more correct than the data.
Yeah. The other disparity I found, which in the black community was the disparity in what I would call low non-lethal what I would call non-lethal uses of force.
Mhm.
It did find that while the study was kind of weird because it looked at stop and frisk data from the time that stop and frisk was a policy in New York City,
Oh,
and
yeah?
it found that while it did find that black people were even though when you that black people were still like more likely to have their hand were more likely to have like low non-lethal forms of force used against them, and like put in their like the cop put in their hands on them. I'm not talking like like throwing them up against the wall, like like when people had when during stop and frisks they would like pat them down and so on and so forth. And but it was like I think it was like 21% times more likely in the black community to happen. I mean, according to the study, this was relatively rare. It was a relatively rare for this to happen, but also the usage of lethal force was also relatively rare. So
Yeah. But,
so
I agree with you. I've seen different things where it doesn't. Though, in regards to the proportionality, like per capita, there is still like a disproportionate result in that for those communities. But I do agree that sometimes that is overstated. But in regards to sentencing and stops and like searches and things with of that nature, like the disproportionateness isn't even explained by the disproportionate crime rate. Like 1350 doesn't explain it or anything like that.
Well, the thing is, in a lot of those cities, such as Detroit, where there's a whole but where there's a lot of murder, I think it was like a huge like only like 29% of all the murders that happen in those cities
Hmm.
get solved because they
Yeah.
happen so often. So it would make sense why the cops would maybe stop black people more often
Well,
is
wait, but
because
if those crimes aren't solved, then why would they stop black people more often?
well, one study said that black people, I think it was from New Jersey, it showed that black people were more likely to speed than white people.
Yeah, I actually have study on that. To some extent, that in Ferguson, when they were doing traffic stops, that the pullover rate uh was about the same, but the pullover rate where there was no objective evidence, meaning that it was the police officer's word, uh was more common in the black population than with whites.
Hmm. Can you explain that statistic again?
Okay, so that they were pulled over about the same rate. However, these stops were much more common for blacks where there was like no radar data, and it was a like statement by the officer versus the white population, which had more stops that involved like a radar, like a speed radar.
I see. Well, this is just I'm just going off the top of my head here, and please do not misinterpret me when I say this. I would say that I was gonna say I brought up the Detroit thing because even though I would say I was going to say that the reason why police are more likely to stop black people was because they're more likely to match a description, and this causes the cops to is it right, is it ethical? I don't really think it is, but when you have that amount of murders going on, eventually the cops are going to start playing and most of these stops result in just the cop just letting the person go on their way. So
Yeah.
while it is it is unfortunate. When you're stretched that far, when you're like I have a cut like
Well,
I
in
have a
part,
cousin.
they're stretched a little bit far because they're making these like ineffective stops. Like they're reacting or over policing areas instead of like addressing the crimes that are occurring, and that uh res- improving those communities and building up those communities like demonstrably results in less crime occurring, like over and over again for all sorts of things, for Planned Parenthood funding, from educational funding. Like these result in dollars upon dollars returned into the economy versus what's put into it. Like I'm more in favor of proactive justice, limiting the amount of crime so that cops aren't like over exerted and are
So what
not
you're
making like more reckless decisions as a result
stopping
of like the
stopping
risks.
stopping crime in the black community won't be caused by just some let me say it like this. It won't be there's no like one policy which can completely just like even if you legalize all drugs, I do think that there would be a crime problem in the black community, not
Yeah,
because of their race but because of just
the
the culture
situation
in
that
the
they're in.
area.
Well, but
This is
see that, so you keep jumping to the culture thing, and when we
no
agree that
I
it's
the thing
socioeconomic, so that means that is something
I mean,
addressable by policy.
being poor does not cause you to become a criminal. But I mean,
Well,
you
it
go to
makes
like
you
other
much
countries.
more likely. Makes you
It
much more
doesn't.
likely.
It's correlated, but it's not a cause. Like
It's so greatly related, and so much crime is related to, like, monetary situations, especially considering the drug crime being, like, one of the greatest representatives for people who are in prison. Like, it correlates pretty heavily, um, and to almost to an extent where you are more likely to be able to find criminals just by being in poor areas, like, and that goes back into the same, like, logical decision making for over policing black communities,
well,
like, so reducing that economic.
black communities aren't really aren't over policed just because they don't like black is because they don't because people don't like black people. They're over policed because there's a lot of crime in those
Yeah,
areas.
but they're over policed even in regards to that crime statistic. And then over policing results in you statistically finding more crime in there in comparison to the areas that are now under policed. And it just feedback loops into itself. And that, like, even if it wasn't originally a racial decision, it is now disproportionately impacting these communities. And it is contributing more and more funding to policing instead of to preventative justice measures. Like, I'm all in favor of creating better people, individuals in society so that they are generating more wealth for the society as a whole, and that so that other, like, funds can be redistributed in more effective ways within society so that everyone can have a better, like, outcome in life.
I get the sort of idea of the black the I'm sorry. I don't know what happened today. My brain is just
You're
completely
okay. We're
fried.
no, we're having a lot of fun, dude. I hope you're enjoying yourself. Like,
I I I I am. I'm not. I'm a bit of a social introvert,
no,
so I
it's
kind
fine,
of.
dude. It's fine.
I know. I
You've been
know.
great. Like, I've had a lot of fun talking to
I
you.
appreciate you. I appreciate you being nice because I was kind when I jumped in here, I was kind of scared you'd be an asshole because I've
No,
debated people who are or a person who is I've debated people who are assholes
oh,
and
you gotta
they're
give me their contact info because I want to debate them. I do want to try and be mean at least one or two times in my debating career. But uh, yeah, no. I just like talking to people and debating these things. And
I
even if I
understand.
disagree with you, like,
We agree on a lot of things, but
yeah,
we
and
disagree
that's
on
what
the
it's like.
solutions. I do
Well,
think
so what do you? So maybe you can help me then understand what are you proposing as solutions?
hmm. The solution would be well, one, it has to come from the top. They have that has to incentivize that is a I do think one thing there's as I said before, there's not really one policy that I do as I said before, I do believe time is the best solution because there are many black millennials who are doing very well and more and there's many blogs on the internet of on black sites, specifically, like the I forgot what that one was called, telling that a lot of black millennials are getting money, but they don't know how to manage it well. And I do think that over that even with the poor schooling and the poor time, that
I
as the wealth increases in the black community, that more
yeah.
that the schools will get better. I am a I do
Can I
believe
add
in
one thing
school
to that
vouchers.
point though?
Yeah.
It does seem like there's articles saying that millennials in general don't know how to manage money. I don't think that's a uniquely black millennial issue.
True.
More millennials in general are more likely to, like, live with their parents into their 30s and all of those things, less likely to own a home, less likely to own a car. So it seems like that, like, is an
I
impact
see
on the generation as a whole.
I see what you're saying, but it was just a site that was tailored mostly to black people and was saying that that there were different that there it did talk about how there were differences in black
Yeah.
spending patterns such
But
I think
don't you think, like, as a community thing, like, it makes sense that they are addressing it, like, on an individual level? Like, when you're speaking, like, to an individual, obviously, you wanna encourage the individual to, like, produce
that's what I'm
better
saying.
outcomes. Yeah,
You have to encourage individuals to because we can go through statistics all day, but statistics don't really come into account when you're talking about just individual people. Individual people can make choices which can anybody can make. I mean, where you come from doesn't really have to define you. I mean, I know I sound like a sappy,
yeah, but
inspirational speaker,
no,
but you
that's
can
fair. What I would say, though, is, like, we for all populations, see that as a whole, like, the vast majority of people in a population, of similar age, socioeconomic status, education level, all have very similar outcomes and results in life. And so having policies in place, in addition to encouraging people to make better choices and educating people into what better choices are available, which I could say could still be incentivized by policy, also helps lead to people making better choices, because when people have a better quality of life, they're more likely to make better choices, especially in regards to education, because the more educated you are, the more rational you're going to be able to be, typically.
All right, we've been going for about what is it, an hour and a half, nearly.
Yeah.
I have some schoolwork to do. I'm
Okay.
not chickening I'm not
No, no, no,
chickening out
no,
on
no.
my.
You're totally fine. I'd love to talk to you again if you ever want to.
Of course,
Definitely,
of course.
definitely get me in contact with those other people that debate. I want to debate them too. Do you have any final memes though, dude? Do you want to share anything with anyone?
Sure. I am. Check out my channel. Also, let me give my final statement: is that even though there are differences in performance on average during, there are racial disparities. These racial disparities don't really have to define how you do in life. You can do well in life. You can go to school, go to college, and you can live a nice life. You just got to know how to how to manage your wealth. You need to know. It's always good to make good financial decisions. Do your research. Do everything you need to do. Do well in school. Work hard. Work smart also, because working hard, it doesn't mean much if unless you're going down a planned out path. And also thank you. Also, I'd like to thank Mr. Gabe's Gunk here for having me on. When he brought me on here, when he brought me on originally, I was kind of nervous, because I don't really consider myself a really good debater or conversationalist, as you can say. But I enjoyed our time here, and I enjoyed being here. Thank you. Would
Yeah,
you like to say anything?
yeah. I just like to say that you definitely, I would say that you're a good conversationalist, and I think with more practice, you probably would be, like, really good at debating, honestly. Like, I thought that you were pretty good. Um, I can see ways, like, that you might not notice certain, like, debate techniques for, like, being really, um,
I'm
persuasive
autistic.
with your
Yeah.
arguments. Oh, but I mean, it's definitely a skill that I think you can learn. I mean, you were really good conversationalist, honestly. Um, I would just say that I think that we can both encourage individuals and look at ways that populations and policies are interacting, and that we can tie these two things together to promote a happier and healthier society in general. But that I love talking to you, dude, and it was a lot of fun.
You too. You too. Even though we disagree on a few things, I still respect you for being a friendly person and having me on. It's been a good time.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. You take it easy.
Also, please don't cancel me.
I'm not gonna cancel you. I'm sure we'll talk again.
All
Uh
right. Aren't you like where like are you like didn't you say you were like up north somewhere?
yeah, I'm in the suburbs of Portland. I'm in Sherwood. It's like,
Oh,
yeah. So the smoke's rolling in. It looks like it's cleared up a little bit though.
oh yeah, because of all the fires.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hardly breathe.
Yeah, it's a little
Anyway.
bit rough.
All right. It was great talking to you. You want me to just call you Gabe?
You can call me Gabe is perfectly fine. You don't have to do the Gabe
All
is
right.
gone.
All right. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Gabe. I really appreciate it. It was good talking to you all. Thank you all for listening to my rambling. It was a good time. All right. Talk to you
Yeah.
another time.
All right, later, dude.